When did a promise to your child put your sanity at risk? The worst decisions often began with the best intentions, or perhaps, with a wedding invitation that felt more like a summons than a celebration. My gut, a reliable if often ignored barometer, had been screaming at me for weeks that agreeing to this whole charade was a catastrophic mistake. Now with the caterers refusing to budge on the vegan options and my daughter's fiancé's family insisting on a full mariachi band for a suburban backyard affair, I was staring down the barrel of a moral conundrum. Do I uphold my promise to my child and let chaos reign, or do I put my foot down, risk tearing the family apart, and salvage some semblance of sanity for everyone involved, starting with my own? I am Liam Bryant 53M, and my life up until this point had been a fairly predictable if occasionally dull journey. Project manager at a mid-sized engineering firm, homeowner in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, divorced for 15 years but amicable with my ex-wife Anne. My biggest daily challenge usually involved wrestling with Russell Singh's 55M unreasonable demands at work. Russell, my boss, was a man whose entitlement seemed to grow exponentially with each passing quarter, a sort of corporate kudzu choking out logic and reason. He was currently campaigning to move our entire department lock, stock, and barrel from our comfortable suburban offices to a gleaming, soulless skyscraper downtown. His reasoning was always vague, couched in buzzwords about synergy and market positioning, but the underlying message was clear: if you weren't on board, you were dead weight. My daughter, Julia Lewis, 18F, was the kind of person who radiated calm even in the eye of a hurricane. It was a trait she inherited from her mother, Anne, and one I often envied. While I tended to internalize stress, Julia possessed an almost preternatural ability to mediate, to find the middle ground when everyone else was digging trenches. She was the family peacemaker, a role she'd embraced since childhood, often settling squabbles between me and her younger, far more impulsive half-brother Jonathan Sanchez, 21M. Jonathan, a self-centered art student whose current magnum opus was a series of poorly rendered, angst-ridden selfies, lived by the philosophy that the world revolved around his immediate gratification. He rarely helped, frequently hindered, and generally existed as a walking, talking argument waiting to happen. The wedding, Julia's wedding to her sweetheart Marco, was originally supposed to be a low-key affair. A small garden ceremony, a backyard reception. Simple, intimate, affordable. That was the initial agreement, whispered over bowls of spaghetti and meatballs a year ago. But like a slowly blossoming invasive species, the guest list had swelled, the expectations had escalated, and the simple backyard reception had begun to mutate into a full-blown logistical nightmare. The first red flag had waved when Joan Griffin, 31F, a friend of Julia's from college who I'd always found a bit too intense, started offering suggestions. Joan had a way of turning every casual conversation into a subtle competition, a quiet contest of superiority. She was the kind of person who, upon hearing you were getting a new car, would immediately tell you about the custom features on her *own *new car. She had been married last year, a lavish affair that Julia had quietly expressed relief at avoiding. Now Joan was subtly pushing for a more extravagant celebration, citing tradition and what Julia deserves. She dropped comments like, "Oh, you simply must have a dessert bar." At my wedding, the macaroon tower was the talk of the town for weeks. It was never outright demanding, but it chipped away at Julia's practical nature, planting seeds of doubt about whether her simple plan was enough. The real problems began when Russell dropped his relocation bombshell. Not a whisper, not a suggestion, but a decree delivered during our Monday morning stand-up, his gaze sweeping over us like a predator surveying its herd. "Team," he'd boomed, his voice echoing a little too loudly in the otherwise quiet room, "we're taking the next step. By end of Q3, our entire operations will be consolidated at our new downtown hub. State-of-the-art facilities, increased collaboration opportunities, a truly global presence." He'd paused, letting the words hang in the air, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "This isn't a suggestion, this is happening." My stomach had dropped, a familiar knot tightening. My house, my whole life, was rooted in this suburban neighborhood. My commute was a blissful 20 minutes door to door. Downtown would mean an hour, maybe more, battling traffic, battling trains. Later that week, Russell pulled me into his office, a spacious corner unit he guarded like a dragon its hoard. He leaned back in his leather chair, hands steepled, eyeing me over his reading glasses. "Liam," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, almost conspiratorial, "I know this transition might be significant for some, but for you I see immense potential." He gestured vaguely towards the city skyline visible through his window, a hazy outline in the distance. "Think of the opportunities, a new challenge, and frankly, Liam, with your experience, you're precisely the kind of anchor we need to stabilize the team during this shift. A leader, a role model." He was laying it on thick, buttering me up like a pancake, and I could feel the cynical part of me recoiling. But the other part, the part that craved stability and avoided conflict, was already running calculations. Could I really afford to resist? My severance package wouldn't be enough to last long in this economy, and finding another job at my age with my specialized skill set wasn't a given. "I appreciate that, Russell," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "but a move downtown. It's a big change. My home, my family, it's all here." I left out the part about my 18-year-old daughter planning her wedding in my backyard. He waved a dismissive hand. "Details, Liam, details. We're offering a generous relocation package, more than enough to cover moving costs, real estate agent fees, maybe even a down payment on a new place downtown." He paused, letting that sink in. "Think about it, a fresh start, new energy, it's truly a win-win." He didn't mention the part where my quiet suburban home, perfectly situated for a backyard wedding, would likely be a significant downgrade in the city. or that the relocation package would barely cover the difference in housing costs, let alone the psychological toll. The relocation pressure was a constant hum in the background of my days, a low thrumming anxiety that made it hard to focus. And then there was the wedding. What started as a small, manageable problem had rapidly metastasized. Julia, bless her peacemaking heart, was caught in the middle. On one side, Marco's large, boisterous family had very specific cultural expectations, politely but firmly pushing for certain traditions: the mariachi band, an elaborate multi-course meal, a guest list that inexplicably included great-aunts twice removed and distant cousins from out of state. On the other side was Joan, subtly undermining every practical decision. A simple sheet cake. Oh, Julia, no, you need a statement cake. Something truly Instagrammable, Shed chirped one evening, showing Julia pictures of towering confections on her phone. Julia, usually so grounded, was starting to waver. I could see the internal struggle in her eyes, the desire to please everyone warring with her natural pragmatism. One Saturday, Jonathan, surprisingly, emerged from his usual cocoon of headphones and sketchpads to announce he had a brilliant idea for the wedding. Okay, so like, instead of a boring old DJ, he'd said, sprawling on the living room couch, scrolling through his phone, we get a live band, something indie, you know, really set the vibe. I know this band, Static Gaze, they played at a gallery opening last month, totally awesome. And instead of those crappy rental chairs, we could do like reclaimed wood benches, very rustic chic. He looked up, his eyes bright with self-congratulation. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Jonathan, we're talking about a backyard wedding, not a Coachella after party. And where are these reclaimed wood benches coming from? Your art studio? He just shrugged, already back to his phone. Jonathan's ideas always sounded grand in theory but lacked any semblance of practical execution, usually dumping the logistical burden squarely on my shoulders. The biggest issue, the one that kept me up at night, was the yard itself. My modest suburban yard, while pleasant enough for a casual barbecue, was not designed for a full-scale wedding reception for over 100 people, complete with a dance floor, a buffet line, and a mariachi band. The plumbing couldn't handle the extra bathrooms. The electrical system would likely blow every fuse in the neighborhood trying to power all the lights and sound equipment. And where would everyone park? We lived on a quiet street, and having 50 cars descend upon us would not only be a nightmare but would surely incite the wrath of Mrs. Henderson, the neighborhood's self-appointed HOA president who tracked every misplaced recycling bin and overgrown shrub. Dad, what if we just moved the party to a venue? Julia had asked one evening, her voice small, almost defeated. She had been poring over rental contracts for tents and portable restrooms, her brow furrowed in concentration. The peacemaker was starting to show cracks. A venue, sweetie? That's going to cost a fortune, Id replied, trying to keep my voice light, but my stomach clenched. My meager savings were earmarked for retirement, not lavish wedding halls. And Russell's relocation package wasn't going to magically appear overnight to cover these new expenses. The next day, Russell called me into his office again. This time, his tone was less coaxing, more commanding. Liam, he said, cutting straight to the chase, I need your firm commitment on this relocation. We're finalizing the moving schedule and I need to know who's in. This is a critical juncture for the company and honestly for your career. Those who are on board will be prioritized for new opportunities, leadership roles. Those who aren't. He let the sentence trail off, but the implication was clear. Those who weren't would find themselves on the unemployment line. He pulled out a printed document. Here's the official relocation agreement. Sign by end of week and we'll start the process. Find yourself a new place, sell your old one, we'll assist. His eyes narrowed, a glint of steel. This isn't just about moving offices, Liam. It's about a complete transformation of our operations, our culture. We need people who are willing to embrace that. I left his office with the printed agreement in my hand, the crisp paper feeling heavy, almost damning. The idea of uprooting my entire life, selling the house Id lived in for 20 years, the house where Julia had grown up, where Wed celebrated countless birthdays and holidays, was almost unbearable. But the alternative, unemployment, a sudden and catastrophic loss of income, was equally terrifying. My head throbbed. I needed to talk to Julia. She was 18, an adult, and her wedding was now the financial and logistical equivalent of a small military operation. That evening, I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same table where Shed done her homework for years, where Wed shared so many meals. I laid out the relocation agreement next to the latest invoice for the mariachi band. Julia, I started, we need to talk about everything. Russell's pushing me hard on this relocation. It's not a suggestion anymore. It's either I move downtown with the company or I'm out of a job. I paused, letting that sink in. She looked up, her usually calm features creased with worry. And honestly, honey, this wedding, it's gotten out of hand. The backyard isn't big enough, the costs are spiraling, and I just don't see how we can make it work here. I gestured around our modest kitchen, then out the window towards the yard, especially if I have to sell the house. The words hung in the air, heavy and full of unspoken consequences. Julia's eyes widened, a flicker of something close to panic in their depths. Her dream, her simple backyard wedding, was crumbling, and with it perhaps our entire suburban life. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the actual transformation Russell was talking about wasn't just about a new office. It was about everything, and I had no idea how to make it right. Julia's eyes widened, a flicker of something close to panic in their depths. Her dream, her simple backyard wedding, was crumbling, and with it perhaps our entire suburban life. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the actual transformation Russell was talking about wasn't just about a new office. It was about everything, and I had no idea how to make it right. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Julia didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't even yell, which, given her age, was almost more unsettling. She just stared at the table, her hands clenched into fists in her lap, the relocation agreement and the mariachi band invoice sitting between us like two unexploded bombs. Dad, she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. You can't lose your job. What about everything? Our house? What about my wedding? The last words were a choked plea. It broke my heart seeing my usually unflappable daughter so utterly lost. I know, honey, I said, reaching across the table to cover her hands with mine. Her skin was cold. That's why we need to figure this out together. My own role in this mess, I was beginning to realize, wasn't just being a victim of circumstances. It allowed it to fester, avoiding confrontation until it became a full-blown crisis. It enabled Joan's subtle manipulations by not shutting them down, let Jonathan's impractical ideas go unchecked, and most damningly buried my head in the sand about Russell's demands until the deadline loomed. The next morning I woke with a jolt, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, my mind already racing. Julia had gone to bed quietly, but the worry lines on her forehead were etched deep. I had to act. First, the wedding. It was the immediate, tangible disaster. I called Marco's mother, Alina, bracing myself for another polite but firm negotiation. Alina, I began, my voice tight, I am calling about the wedding plans. As much as we'd love a mariachi band and all the wonderful traditions, my backyard simply isn't equipped, and honestly, the costs are spiraling out of control. There was a pause, a significant one. I expected resistance, perhaps even offense. Instead, she sighed. Liam, she said, her voice softer than I anticipated, we too have been concerned. Marco has tried to tell us, but traditions, they are important, but not at the cost of your peace or Julia's happiness. We will talk to our family, perhaps a smaller band or a different kind of music for the reception, and the guest list, yes, we can trim it. We have many cousins, yes, but not all must be there. It was a lifeline, unexpected and gratefully received. Alina, it turned out, was less a relentless cultural advocate and more a worried mother-in-law trying to honor her family while also ensuring her son's future happiness. My initial perception of her as simply demanding was clearly one-sided. My conversation with Joan, however, was less productive, at least initially. I decided to try a direct approach, something I usually avoided. Joan, I said, catching her when she called Julia about some artisanal flower wall she'd seen, I appreciate your enthusiasm for Julia's wedding, but we need to scale things back. Julia and Marco wanted a simple affair, and it's become quite the opposite. We can't afford all these extras. There was a beat of silence. Oh, she said, her voice cool, almost wounded. I was just trying to help Liam. Julia deserves the best. My wedding was just so perfect, I wanted her to have that too. The competitive streak was as clear as day. Perfect for you maybe, I retorted, letting my frustration show, but this isn't your wedding, Joan, it's Julia's and she's stressed. We're going back to basics. She sputtered something about being misunderstood and hung up. I knew it'd probably offended her, but for once I didn't care. I needed to protect Julia and my sanity from well-intentioned but ultimately damaging suggestions. As for Jonathan, I cornered him while he was raiding the fridge. No live band, Jonathan, no reclaimed wood benches. This isn't an art installation, it's a wedding. Your sister needs help, real help, not more grand ideas that fall on my lap. If you want to contribute, find a way to make the existing plans work within budget. Maybe you could design the invitations or help set up the chairs we already own. He looked up, a half-eaten sandwich dangling from his hand, genuinely surprised. Dude, chill, I was just trying to be creative. Creative without being practical is just noise, Jonathan, and right now we need less noise and more solutions. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't self-interest, a hint of actual concern mixed with a healthy dose of annoyance. A week passed. Alina had indeed spoken to her family. The mariachi band was replaced by a talented local acoustic duo. The guest list was trimmed by nearly half, focusing on immediate family and closest friends. With still more people than my backyard could comfortably hold, but significantly more manageable. Joan sent Julia a terse email apologizing for overstepping and offering to help with table decorations, within budget of course. It was a grudging olive branch, but an olive branch nonetheless. My bluntness, it seemed, had shocked her out of her competitive haze or at least redirected it towards a more constructive outlet. I still had the relocation agreement sitting on my desk, unsigned. I'd spent hours researching other jobs, but the market was tough, and Russell's offer, for all its implied threats, was financially significant. I felt trapped. 2 weeks later, the air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and simmering anxiety. The wedding was still happening in the backyard, but now with a scaled-back guest list and a focus on simplicity. Julia, with Alina's surprising help, had found a local caterer who specialized in buffet-style meals that were both delicious and affordable, offering vegan options without complaint. Marco's family, it turned out, were more flexible than I'd assumed, once the initial pressure was off and they understood the constraints. The mariachi band was gone, replaced by the acoustic duo, who practiced gentle melodies that drifted through the open windows. My primary focus, however, remained on Russell and the relocation. I'd scheduled a follow-up meeting with him, determined to negotiate to find some middle ground. I'd realized that my fear of conflict had often led me to accept unfavorable terms both professionally and personally. This time I needed to stand firm. When I walked into Russell's office, he was leaning back, an expectant smirk on his face. He clearly assumed I was there to sign. Russell, I began, placing the agreement on his desk but not pushing it toward him. I appreciate the offer and I understand the company's vision, but I cannot uproot my entire life on short notice, especially with Julia's wedding just weeks away. My home, my community, they're important to me. He scoffed. Liam, we've been over this. This is a non-negotiable. It's adapt or be left behind. I took a deep breath. Then I need to understand what left behind truly means. Is there a severance package if I decline? What are the terms? He leaned forward, his smirk gone. Liam, are you threatening to walk away? No, Russell, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my gut. I'm exploring my options just as you're exploring yours. I'm a valuable asset to this company. My experience is crucial for this transition, but I can't be forced into a decision that devastates my personal life. I'm asking for flexibility, a longer transition period perhaps, or the option to work remotely a few days a week once the new office is established. If that's not possible, then I need to know what a graceful exit looks like for me. Russell looked genuinely surprised. He was used to subordinates caving. He was used to me caving. His entitled facade seemed to crack slightly. Remote work, that's not part of the new culture, Liam. We need synergy. Synergy doesn't happen if your experienced people are burnt out or leave, I countered. I am offering a way to retain me, to retain my knowledge and stability for your transformation. Think of it as a strategic compromise. He didn't say anything, just stared at me calculating. I saw a flicker of grudging respect or perhaps just pragmatism in his eyes. He realized that losing me now would be a greater disruption than my continued presence, even with a modified schedule. I'll consider it, Liam, he finally said, his voice flat. But don't think this changes the overall direction. This transformation is happening. I nodded. It wasn't a victory, but it was a battle not lost, a tiny crack in the wall of his entitlement. I felt a surge of something unfamiliar, quiet pride. Id stood up for myself. A month had passed since that conversation, and the wedding day was rapidly approaching. My backyard, once a symbol of my impending doom, was now transformed. Jonathan, surprisingly, had taken my words to heart. He hadn't just helped, he'd poured his creative energy into practical, beautiful solutions. He'd salvaged old wooden pallets from a neighbor's discarded fence and, with Julia's help, transformed them into rustic, surprisingly sturdy benches that perfectly fit the garden aesthetic. He'd even designed elegant, minimalist invitations, hand-drawn and printed at a local print shop, that garnered compliments from everyone. He also took charge of the sound system, ensuring the acoustic duo had proper amplification without blowing fuses, and even volunteered to handle parking coordination on the day of. It's like performance art, Dad, he declared with a grin, directing imaginary cars. I watched him, genuinely amazed. His self-centeredness wasn't gone, but it had found an outlet in contribution, making him genuinely useful, even indispensable. My perception of him as simply a burden shifted. He was a young man still finding his way, and my bluntness had perhaps given him the direction he needed. Joan had also been surprisingly helpful. After her initial sulk, she returned with an almost manic energy, meticulously arranging flowers, crafting personalized favors, and even coordinating a surprise flash mob dance for Julia, which thankfully Julia found hilarious rather than mortifying. Joan's competitive nature was still present, but it manifested as a drive to make this asterisk wedding perfect, not just asterisk her asterisk wedding. Her suggestions now began with, would it help if I, rather than you absolutely must. I realized Joan's competitive streak wasn't just about superiority, it was about excellence, a need to prove herself capable, perhaps even to herself. When she felt a part of the team rather than an external influencer, her energy became a force for good. My initial judgment of her as purely shallow had been too harsh. As for Russell, he'd surprised me further. He called me into his office again, not to demand my signature, but to present a revised offer. Liam, he said, less smugly this time, I've considered your request. Given your long-standing contribution and the critical nature of this transition, we're willing to offer a hybrid remote work option for the first 6 months. 2 days remote, 3 in the new office. After that, we'll reassess. It's not our standard, but exceptional circumstances. He cleared his throat. And the relocation package, we can extend it by an additional 5%. It wasn't everything Id wanted, but it was a significant concession. It meant I wouldn't have to sell the house immediately. I could commute 3 days a week, test the waters, and have a buffer to see if the transformation was actually viable for me. It was a win, a partial one, but a win nonetheless. My willingness to push back, to articulate my boundaries without fear, had yielded results. Russell, for all his entitlement, wasn't entirely unreasonable when faced with an unwavering, logical argument. He was a businessman, and I had presented a business case for keeping me. The transformation he spoke of wasn't just about offices and culture. It had forced me to transform my own approach to conflict to assertiveness. On the wedding day, the sun shone bright, casting long shadows across the carefully arranged backyard. Julia, radiant in a simple white dress, walked down the aisle. Id mowed myself towards Marco, who beamed with love. The acoustic duo played a soft, joyful tune. Jonathan, looking surprisingly dapper, directed guests with a seriousness that belied his usual nonchalance. Joan, in a tasteful bridesmaid dress, was bustling, ensuring everything ran smoothly, a picture of focused efficiency rather than desperate competition. Alina, Marco's mother, stood next to me, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, a genuine smile on her face. It is perfect, Liam, she whispered, simple but full of love. This is true family. The reception was a joyous, relaxed affair. The smaller guest list meant everyone had space to breathe, to talk, to truly celebrate. The caterer's buffet was a hit, the vegan options praised even by the most ardent meat-eaters. The reclaimed pallet benches looked fantastic, a testament to Jonathan's unexpected talent. Even Mrs. Henderson, the HOA president, had stopped by not to complain about parking but to admire the fairy lights Jonathan had strung through the trees. She even complimented the garden. My initial terror of her wrath had been another unfounded fear, born of my own anxieties. As I watched Julia dance with Marco, her face glowing with happiness, I felt a profound sense of peace. The wedding disaster had averted, transformed into something genuine and beautiful. The relocation pressure, while not entirely gone, was manageable, giving me breathing room to make a thoughtful decision about my future rather than a panicked one. The complete transformation Russell had spoken of was indeed happening, but not just at the office. It was happening within me, within my family, and even within the relationships I had with people Id once dismissed or misjudged. I had learned that my own passivity, my reluctance to confront issues head-on, had often exacerbated them. By finally finding my voice, by setting boundaries, by seeing others not just through the lens of my own fear or frustration, but with a genuine attempt at understanding, I had begun to reshape my reality. My suburban life wasn't crumbling, it was evolving. The house was still mine for now. My job was secure for now. And my daughter, the family peacemaker, had found her peace, reminding me that sometimes the greatest transformations begin not with grand plans, but with a simple, honest conversation and the courage to finally have it.